Hey, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. Today is another one of the If Alphas Could Talk little sessions. Today, we're going to talk about women drivers. Now, women drivers in particular would be race drivers, because throughout history, there's been countless great women drivers. They don't always get a lot of publicity because, after all, they're racing in a man's sport. And you know what? We can't have a woman outshining a man. And that happened for many, many, many years. And at times still happens today. There's a lot of headway that's been made. But the nice thing is today, I don't want to argue and debate the crazy things that people did, but I do want to at least shine a light on some of the great racers or significant moments that have happened in women drivers throughout the years. Let's go ahead and we'll sneak to our first slide here. So talking about first, Bertha Benz, she was very supportive of her husband, Carl, and his making a car. And so he's attributed with getting the first honest car, the little Mercedes, and you'll see the little picture at the top up there. Well, at one point, she jumped in that car and she drove it for 111 miles with her two teenage kids, a 13 and a 15-year-old boy in the car. And this is the first time that a woman had ever taken a car on a long distance drive. And people thought that's just absurd. Of course, the cars were really a joke anyway. And if they did it, well, a woman couldn't drive it. And lo and behold, she did. She drove it 111 miles from where she lived to where her parents lived. And the trick is there weren't big roads. Today, if you go on Google, it takes 1 hour and 25 minutes to get that distance because of the roads. And those are good roads. But back then, she did it in 12 hours. And yes, she had challenges along the way. She met each of those challenges. She had to clear the carburetor with a hat pin when the carburetor plugged up. She had to use her garter to wrap a little, insulate a wire that was shorting out. And she also had to stop at a pharmacy and get fuel or mixture of stuff to make the fuel that would burn. Oh, and she had to fix the drive belt and stop at a leather place. These are all challenges that she met without trouble. And it proved that, look, if a guy can drive this car, why can't a woman? And so to me, I love the fact that she was able to take that on. The next fun one was our buddy, Camille Degas. Camille decides, I'm going to enter a car race. Well, there was no rules that said she couldn't, because no, why would a woman enter a car race? They didn't even have to make that rule till she showed up. And she entered a race in 1901, and they suddenly were like, oh man, don't we have a rule about this? But nope, so she entered, and she did just fine. The problem was the very next year when they did the race, there was a bad accident or two because the weather was horrible, the roads were bad, and she stopped to help somebody that had crashed. So nothing she did was wrong, but at the end of that race, they decided they were going to ban women. And the answer was they had to avoid the female excitability. What does that have to do with the situation on the car? Nothing. Did she do anything wrong? Nothing. So I love the fact that she's the first woman to enter an actual sanctioned official car race. She's also the first one to get banned. So to me, I just got a kick out of that. So now the nice fun thing is that we still don't have a lot of races back then, but just even driving a car was pretty impressive. So they want to build a racetrack. They want to build Brooklands, and they've figured out how to do it. Unfortunately, typical things, they've underestimated the cost. The cost was over 10 times what they thought, and they ran out of money. And had it not been for Ethel Locke King, she came along and gave $150,000 back then in that day. It was a monster amount of money, and that was enough for them to finish the racetrack. So had we not had her contribution, we would not have had the Brooklands racetrack and a lot of racing that went on in the UK at that time. That was the first huge super speedway type structure that was built. And it's fun to visit if you ever get a chance to stop by Brooklands to check out events there, the museum there, stuff. But none of that would have happened without Ethel coming in. The other one is Alice Ramsey, who has, in 1909, she was 22 years old, And she drove across the country in an old Maxwell, which last I knew was in the lobby upstairs, and I think it still is, of this museum. The trick is that you can imagine how hard it is to drive across the country now when we have interstates and easy access and comfy cars. That's still a chore. Well, she did this at 22 years old when there's no road signs. There's no road, there's no paved roads, there's old wagon carts, and she made it across. I mean, yes, it took a long time. Yes, it was a lot of repairs. But the point is, if it wasn't for people going off and doing challenges like this, we wouldn't have the cars, we wouldn't have the roads, we wouldn't have the racetracks, we wouldn't have the passions that we have today. So it's not just a man's sport, even back in 1901 or even 1909. So very, very fun. So we'll sneak into the 1920s, because now World War I has come to an end. Now cars have become a little bit more normal. And there's more and more people racing. One of the people that really jumped into racing was Helen Neese. Helen Neese she was an actor, she was a dancer, she was a very outspoken, creative character. The challenges with Helen is that she raced Alfa Romeos, by the way, and you can see I love Alfa Romeos, but I love anybody that drives Alfa Romeos, so that's all good. She's known as the Bugatti Queen because she also raced Bugattis, and that was her initial stardom in the world of racing. But she had challenges to come up against. They didn't want her to race in races with other men. They wanted her to be in the ladies' race, but she wanted to prove herself in races that were not ladies' races; they were just everybody's races. And she was able to, one of the first people to really do well in races, despite what they threw at her. So very, very fun. Now, the downside is that at the end of World War II, she was accused of being a collaborator with Germans because she was really fraternizing with a lot of German officers. And so, it's hard to know whether she really was, but if she was discredited. So if you read the book, The Bugatti Queen, it's a great book all about her life and her history, and talks about the great things she did. That also goes into some of the things that are more questionable. So I'm sorry she died in poverty. I'm sorry that she was kind of discredited, but maybe she earned some of it. I don't know. I'll let you guys read the book and decide. So next slide would be Lucy Schell. Speaking of books, so Lucy Schell was a daughter of a rich man from the United States, and she lived in Europe. She got into cars. She met a guy named Laurie Schell, and the two of them worked well. They rallied together. They did all sorts of great road rallies because there weren't as many street or tracks to drive on as there were road rallies. That was very popular, and she would enter them. And so as time went on, she also heard as Hitler was building up, and there was a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment. She knew this guy was nuts, and so she went off and spent a huge amount of her inheritance. So after her father died, she took basically half her inheritance, and she gave it to the Delahaye company and said, "I want you to build a French car that is going to be able to beat the Silver Arrows." The fastest things going in the late 30s were all the Mercedes and the auto unions that Hitler had funded. And she wanted to slap Hitler in the face with a French car that would beat him. So she spent this massive amount of money with Delahaye, and they built the Delahaye 145. And then to really make it good, she hired René Dreyfus to drive the car. And he did. In 1938, at the French Grand Prix, they rolled that car out there, and he easily beat the Silver Arrows. It was the one shining moment. She was happy. René was happy. Hitler was not happy. So that would not have happened had it not been for her absolute burning passion for cars in general, for racing, and she was on the right side of ethical and moral beliefs, just like that lady. So all in all, a very good person. You can read all about it in Neil Bascom's book, Faster. Another phenomenal book to pick up if you, yeah, I think I've mentioned a couple of books in this thing. But anyway, very, very good book, and was the book of the month for the LeMay Museum's book club. So if you're not part of that, hey, you might consider joining their book club. So, all right, so we can jump to the next one. Now, Violet Morris. Violet Morris was a unique individual. Violet was a phenomenal hardcore racer, but Violet spent her whole life, whether it was racing or whether it was in just general life, she dressed as a man, she acted like, she tried very hard to present herself as a man. She didn't get in her way. She raced and things, and I think in some ways it almost benefited her in the racing world. But the downside for Violet was that she also was a very strong Nazi sympathizer. And so during World War II, she actually was pointing out to the Gestapo who the resistance fighters were that were part of race teams or whatever. And so as soon as the race would be over, some of those people would disappear. And it started getting back to her. So after World War II, Violet was driving down a road in France. Simple enough. Unfortunately, they knew she was coming and they stopped her car, ambushed her, and killed Violet. So Violet had maybe made a bad choice or two, and she paid for it. But up till that point, she was a very strong, aggressive racer and following her own path. So Jill Scott, on the other hand, very different. Jill is like, she was 5 feet tall when she's standing on her toes. She's this tiny little diminutive person, and she was racing, great big cars. There were sometimes races that would say, no, we're not letting her race simply because the car is too big. And I'm like, what? And the answer was that they just didn't think she should race. But I like what she said. She wrote a book, I don't have it, but in her book, she wrote that she wanted to drive like a man, handling the big fast cars with verve and enthusiasm. But she goes, I want to also be feminine. And so that was her goal, was just to always come off as feminine as she could, and yet be out to competing with the guys that were racing at the same time. And it's funny that she should have to even play that role, but she felt that was her job. And at 5 feet tall, the fact that she's able to handle these cars was impressive as heck. We got another one or two that are that same way. They weren't big people. So Victoria is the same kind of thing. Victoria got mad at the fact that when they were racing, Victoria would be interviewed by the press at times, and they'd write articles about how she looked. They'd write articles about her hair. They'd describe her beautiful eyes or whatever. And she'd say, why can't they talk about my driving? And yet that is still happening today. When you look at racers, when a woman competes at the Indy 500, amazingly, the article will talk about her looks. And you're like, wait, why? Did they talk about, Elio Castroneves' looks? No, they talked about how he climbed the fence and did a Spider-Man jump, but they didn't talk about his looks. And yet that is, to me, she battled that back then. We're still battling that today. And it's not just racing. So anyway, I do get a kick out of the fact that they were so far ahead of their time and standing up for things that most people didn't even think about. So, so next we have Veronesa Maria Antoinetta Devon Avanzo. Man, that is a monster name. So she was a good racer. Her father, back in that time, her father pushed her. This is the 20s and prior, and her father was encouraging her to be a racer. Not a lot of parents do that. A lot of parents would probably say, no, it's not for my daughter. Well, the trick is it's for anybody's daughter who really wants to do it. In fact, if your daughter wants to build buildings or they want to fly airplanes or whatever, they should be encouraged to do whatever crazy idea they have, exactly the way you would for your boy or your neighbor or whatever. So her father encouraged her. Then when she got married, her husband encouraged her and it helped her get cars and got her racing. So she did extremely well in racing. She also met up with people like Tazio Nuvolari. She raced at the Circuit de Gardo, which was her best race. I think she got second place in that race. She raced in the Targa Florio a number of times. And she even in 1932 was hired on for the Scuderia Ferrari team to race for Enzo Ferrari. He was racing Alfas. but she was hired on to race for Scuderia Ferrari. So you cannot be an average driver. You have to be extremely good. And it's nice to see that with the right encouragement, she was able to learn that, encourage or exercise that and prove it even to somebody like Enzo Ferrari, who's not usually the most forward-thinking person out there. So Elizabeth Eunuch. I don't know how you say her last name. Eunuch, maybe it, Eunuch, I don't know. But the nice thing is, I don't know, she doesn't have a huge race history. I don't know that much about her. Other than in 1928, she entered the Targa Florio. Now it's a tough race. You do the 11 laps around the island there. She was leading that race for 10 of those 11 laps. And had her car not broken, she would have basically gone on to win. She had led the thing for 10 of 11 laps. That's a pretty good percentage. And this isn't a woman's race. This isn't everybody's race. So amazing. And I don't know how many people, a show of hands, how many people in this room or online have raced an old vintage car like this, even today. They are a lot of work. It's a very tough thing to do. I'm just impressed that she's able to actually race this and do this. I'm impressed anybody was, but 10 of 11 laps. So even if I don't know much more about her, I like her. So, all right. So next we have Glenda Stewart Hawkes. She started racing motorcycles in 1920. In 1930, she took a Morgan three-wheeler, a scary little thing that is normally scary at 50 miles an hour, hard to drive, hard to steer, hard to control. She took one to 113 miles an hour. I can guarantee you there's probably hardly anybody you've ever met in your life that would ever be gutsy enough to take a Morgan three-wheeler to that kind of speed. So she has incredible guts. She also went out to the Brooklands. She liked high speed. She went on Brooklands and she set a race, or lap speed, fastest of a woman, 135 miles an hour. And if you notice the picture down there of that on the far side, that's the Napier Railton. That was the man in 1935. That's only 7 miles an hour faster than her. Oh, and that's a famous picture that they always post about the history of Brooklands. Look at how impressive this guy is doing this in. Well, she's only 7 miles an hour slower. You don't see her publicized. And that's the kind of thing that, to me, has always been a crime in society is, hey, whatever a person does, if it's impressive, we should note it, pat them on the back for it. But nope, we post that picture time and time again. So anyway, 7 miles an hour is not a huge difference when you're at 135 miles an hour. So Marguerite Marouz. Marguerite was the sidekick to Odette Seco. We'll talk about both of them here. Margaret Marouz and Odette entered the 1930 Le Mans, and they were the first women team to enter that race. And they were driving a Bugatti, but so I'd like it to say it was an Alfa, but it was a Bugatti. And they got what they get, 7th place in their first try. And so, of course, that was the highest a woman had ever placed in the Le Mans, because that was the first time a woman ever raced in Le Mans. So the nice thing is, if we go to the next slide, Odette was her racing partner. Odette raced Alfas and Bugattis. But Odette went back, and it was in 1932 that Odette and her team got 4th place. So that is the highest finish of any woman in the Le Mans. It's a 4th place overall that's ever happened, and it still has not been beaten. Now, there's challenges, I'm sure, that in this pretty impressive racers since. I'm not want to diminish the fact that there's countless people racing Le Mans who've done well. But that's an amazing accomplishment, to keep the car from falling apart, to stay on the road, to stay up and race. And honestly, how about a quick show of hands? How many people in this room do lapping days at the racetrack or have gone out to a driving event? So I see a number of hands that go up. Now, there's a big difference between that and actually racing, because in racing, you're not just trying to find the best line, you're trying to get that move all right and just get ahead of that next car. You got to make that pass. You've got to outbrake that other car. There's all sorts of things like that. And you do that hour after hour after hour after, that's incredibly impressive. I'm not that level. I can drive on the track. I'm not a racer. There is a big, big difference. So incredibly impressive that Odette and Marguerite were able to get so successful in Le Mans, racing many times, and that Odette and her team could get that 4th place overall finish. So very, very cool. The next person is Anne Cecil Itier. And if I butchered her last name, you guys just have to forgive me. I'll do my best on Itier. She had 2 main passions, women's rights and car racing. She entered her first race in 21. She won it. Her skills took her to 5 different Le Mans races in the 30s. And when she couldn't find a race, she went out and organized races. When World War II shows up, she says, well, no big deal. I can't race. But she organized a group of women in cars. They would race the dangerous roads to the front lines during World War II to gather the mail from the soldiers and then rush it back up and back and forth, just nonstop. They're getting shot at. It's dangerous. It's crazy. But they're doing it because they said, we love to drive. And this is making a difference. So yeah, I'm impressed. So it may not be on a racetrack, but damn, that's a good stunt to do. So, so Patty Nee Smith, again, another one of those people that she's an actress. She's a singer. She's also a racing driver. She also happened to be a Labour Party elector. She got elected for her little area in the UK. She was a pilot. She was happened to be Britain's very first flight attendant ever. Kind of a hodgepodge of different skill sets. She was obviously willing to try different things constantly. She was even the chauffeur for the Prime Minister of the UK for a little while. So she was she raced a little bit. So her racing was nice, it was cool, but when she wasn't racing, she just was constantly promoting women's rights at a time when that wasn't that common. That wasn't an accepted thing to do. So she was quoted as saying, "I'm convinced that a modern girl has every bit as much stamina as the modern man." I probably butchered her accent, but the idea is she's not here to tell me, so we're okay. But no disrespect to her. So anyway, I really appreciate the fact that she was out, fighting the good fight on the racetrack and off. Yvonne Simon, or Simon, however you say her last name, started racing in the late 30s. She was still a strong racer in 1950 when she raced against Luigi Canetti at the 24 Hours of Spa, which is a legendary race where Luigi raced for 23 hours and 20 minutes of the 24 hours. They got him out for a 20-minute or 30-minute break, and that was about it. But, and yes, so he did win that race. But while he was running that race, he also took notice of her and her driving. So he invited her back to race for Ferrari the next year. So in 1951, she came back and he gave her a team car, a Ferrari 166 Coupe. And she and Betty Haig was her name, got in there and won their class. So that's Betty and Yvonne standing next to the Ferrari 166 in 1951. The other picture is Yvonne from when she was a couple of years earlier racing. So yeah, kind of fun. So next person would be, her name was Faye Taylor, but she was known as Lady Leadfoot. And she won a tennis tournament in 1922. She was a good athlete. She used the winnings to go out and buy her first car. I thought that was kind of fun. She got into cars. She had raced motorcycles, but in 1931, she decided, I'm going to transition to cars. And she was good enough the following year that somebody said, I'm going to give this person an Alfa Romeo 8C 2300 Monza to drive. And so that was a car that you'll see displayed upstairs is the exact same kind of car. A very exclusive car at that era. So that means somebody recognized her skill set and said, no, she's good. And so put her in the car. She always raced in a skirt and a jacket. That was her little trick, because she said, this is right. But once she got on the car in her skirt and jacket and got going, she raced as fast as anybody. So I love her, making her statement. Unfortunately, during World War II, she had a bad habit of also liking the Nazis and siding with the wrong side. And so she ended up getting jail time. She was Irish, so she spent time in Ireland in jail and never really made it back to racing after World War II. But up until that time, clearly she showed a lot of promise and did well. So kudos to that. So Kay, I wanted to call it, Petri or something. Took me a while to somebody corrected me and said, no, that's pronounced Peter, Fred. You just are spelling, you're pronouncing it wacky. So Kay Peter, she was funny. She always had spotted a pale blue race suit. She was another one of those people that's like 5 feet tall at best. So compare her to that car. And she's out there racing that car. She had to have pillows and cushions jammed in around her because it's not like the cars had adjustable seats. So if it's tough to race a car, if it's tough to drive something like that, imagine doing that with pillows jammed in around you. I mean, the insecurity you must feel as you're moving has got to be crazy. And yet she did it and she raced. So more power to that. She didn't win very many things, but she was always a good competitor and doing well. So credit to her for being out there at Brooklands racing and other racetracks, especially driving something that crazy big. Dorothy Chapney. Dorothy, she wanted to race cars. She wanted to go fast. So she took a little sneaky trick. She married the head of the Riley company. And of course, wanting to make sure his wife was happy, he was always giving her the fastest cars he could and supporting her racing. He knew it was good for him. And so she raced in Le Mans a few times. In 1934, she won the award for the fastest woman in the race. She finished 13th overall. I'm sure there was a few talks when she got home because there were actually 2 Rileys that finished above her in the race. So you can just imagine her getting home going, what the hell? Why is my car not fast enough? So anyway, phenomenal person. I just love the all-around racers that get out there and take on these big races like the Le Mans and race at Brooklands. These aren't slow racetracks. These aren't easy racetracks. So Joan Richmond, she's from Down Under. She's Australian. And Australia was doing everything they could to discourage women races. They would make rules at racetracks to prevent them from racing. And the car companies and things down there didn't really want to support it. But the car clubs, on the other hand. Now, car clubs wanted members. They wanted to increase their membership. So they started having races. So she may not have been able to race in official races in Australia, but she started joining car clubs and joining and going out and racing with them. I don't know if there was any Avance clubs in Australia. There might have been. I'd have to look that one up. Somebody get a hold of Adam Kramer and ask him if he started a club down there in Australia in the 30s. And so anyway, the point is there were Alpha clubs. There was all sorts of car clubs. And the trick is that she got out there and she raced a lot. Then she finally started loosening the rules and she was able to race in real official races. And the first time she took 5th place overall. So she obviously had built her skills in those clubs. So the clubs paid off and she taught those people a lesson for not letting her race in the first place by beating most of them. So I love that kind of thing. As years went on, she went to Europe, she raced well, she rallied well, and she raced in tracks all over Australia. And I like her little picture posing with all the trophies on the hood of her car. So very, very fun. Margaret Allen is the next one we have. Before, she was a decoder for British intelligence and an ambulance driver and a Vogue magazine motoring correspondent. Margaret was a race driver in the UK, road races, track races, endurance races, anything she could. She got the attention of the factories like Bentley and MG, who came to her and said, yeah, you're doing really well. We'd like you to drive our cars because they think maybe they'll sell cars. And it worked. She raced and raced well for those guys. And it's a rare treat to actually be approached. A lot of women fight for a chance. And yet she had earned her respect out there racing, and MG and Bentley and others came to her to seek her out. So very, very cool. In 1935, she was driving a 7-year-old Bentley at the Le Mans. And in the practice lap, she set the fastest lap that car had ever done. And bear in mind, that car is the one that won, 7 years earlier, driven by Lord Howe. And she beat all of his times in a 7-year-old car. So pretty darn impressive what happens if you actually look underneath. That's not written up too many places in the history of Le Mans. You have to find these people and find their stories, and it shouldn't be that way. So the next person, Elsie Wisdom. Now, Elsie was nicknamed Bill by her brothers because they thought her a bit of a tomboy. And she actually liked it, thought it was kind of funny. So she kept the nickname Bill, and she stuck with it throughout her racing career and her life. She won races at Brooklands. Her husband then bought her a big 7-liter Leyland Thomas. It's a great big car with a huge engine. And of course, the officials immediately banned it and said, no, a woman can't drive a car with such a large motor. Took a little bit of arguing and fighting. Within a year or so, she was racing it. And she did race, and she won the very first race that she entered after the ban was lifted. Admittedly, when you want to race a car like that at Brooklands is a high-speed track. It is not designed for low-speed cars. So when you have a big monster engine with a car that goes fast, get on that gas pedal and go. And she had the guts to do that. So very, very cool. She won her first race out. And then she and her husband also teamed up to race in the Millimia, Monte Carlo rallies, things like that. And so very, very strong racing record. And then we go to the very next little group. This is a group of 4 women. When I talk about Brooklands, even though, remember at the beginning of this talk, it was funded by a woman to finish this construction. It wouldn't even had it had it not been funded. And lo and behold, they still had bans all the way along to keep women out of racing. And anytime you hear me say that there was racing allowed on Brooklands by women, it was because these 4 women fought to make that happen. This is, their names, Gwenda, Doreen, Kay, and Bill were the ones that were fighting behind the scenes to get the rules changed. So yes, they throw in little bans at times, but these are the heroes that made that happen at that racetrack. And bear in mind, at that point, there's road races, but big racetracks, it was Brooklands, and then Monterey, and in France was built, it was similar. So otherwise, if you're going to race a car, you had to be racing on the streets, and they didn't have as many rules there. But these were the big tracks, the big high speeds. So thank you for these 4 for doing that. All right, so Sarah, in this country, you got Sarah Christian. Sarah wanted to enter NASCAR racing, and so in 1949, she entered a car in NASCAR, and she became the first woman to race in NASCAR. She raced for 6 of the 8 races that season. She even raced 1 race in 1950 as well. But the other thing is that when they just opened Charlotte Speedway, and Sarah was the first woman to ever race at Charlotte Speedway. And NASCAR is not really one to be a forward thinker as far as a lot of racing things and worldly things. So it was impressive that they actually let her race. And now when you look at NASCAR, there are more women racing in NASCAR than there are in percentage-wise than there are in any other racing. Right behind it is drag racing. But you look at it, you think that it sort of, the ice was broken by Sarah. And I'm not sure if it's just that the NASCAR officials weren't looking and they accidentally did it. No, I don't know. I don't know the story behind the story. I just know that I appreciate the fact that she took the time to do it, and she competed and she raced. No, she never won anything, but she was out there running a car. And hardly anybody in this room can raise their hand and say they were out there racing NASCAR. And so I'm impressed by it. So now we get up to the 1950s. Now in 1950s, Formula One was established in 1950. Before that, it was Grand Prix racing. It's basically the same thing. They just kind of formalized it, brought in a bunch more rules and things. It took until 1958 before the first woman raced in Formula One. And that woman was Maria Teresa de Filippi. I don't think you say that like that. Now, Maria was not the greatest racer, but she was good enough to qualify and get out there, and she beat a couple of other cars that did not qualify. So I'm not going to say she was a hack. I'm just saying she wasn't the greatest racer. But by God, she got out there and she raced. she had a phenomenal car. She had a Maserati 250F. So a little funny story is when I was in Italy photographing that very car that's in that picture to put it in the video game Forza Motorsports, my daughter was with me. My poor daughter is sitting in the background in half my pictures as I'm taking the picture. And every third picture, I'm like, Maddie, get over here. And she had to come over and she's like, what? And I'm telling her, check out this. And I'm telling her something special about the car, or Maria's signature that's on the car, or there's a lot of mechanical things. And I don't know that it's hard for any of us to look at a car sitting stationary and really appreciate the story behind it. But this car, it's not just the mechanical part of this car. It's the fact that Maria took this car and drove it in a man's sport, in a man's race. And she, A, survived it, B, went down in history. And even if she wasn't, like I say, the fastest racer out there, she set the trend. And so it took another 15 years before another woman raced in Formula One. And when they talked to that woman about her racing, she said, I was motivated by Maria. She attributes it back to this person. So that's why we race. That's why we go out there. You're setting an example for the next person, whether that's a guy or a woman, doesn't matter. So thank you, Maria, for doing that. It's very cool. So we'll go to another Marie this time, Marie Olner and René Wagner. I love them because they raced Alfa Romeos. I also love them because they didn't start racing when they were kids. They didn't start racing in their 20s. They didn't get to start racing until dang 30s or so, because there was a stupid war getting in the way as they were trying to get started in life. So they never raced until they were, in their 30s. But then they entered every road race or rally they could, and a few races on tracks at times. But rallies were their main focus. And because they liked driving, they also had a business that they delivered fruit. So they would, when they weren't rallying, they were loading up their cars and zooming around delivering fruit to make the money to pay for their rallying. So I just love, there was a third person in their group, I can't remember the name, but I just loved their attitude. I loved their mindset. And I love the fact that they didn't get discouraged because they were 30, because there's no reason you can't start racing when you're 30 or 40 or 60. So yeah, I mean, the idea is enjoy what you have and make the best of it. So now we have Gilberte Therion. She was from Belgium. So I don't know how you pronounce Belgian names, so again, apologize. Her father encouraged her to race. That's, again, I just can't emphasize enough. Encourage people to do the things they want to do. It may not be racing, but encourage them. In this case, her father encouraged her to race. They came from some money. She saw a Porsche at one point in the 50s and fell in love with that. And so she started buying and rallying Porsches. I mean, you can see one of the earliest Porsches out there. She's out driving that. By mid-50s, she was aiming for Le Mans and racing in other endurance races. And her biggest win came in the Tour de Corsica, where she became the first woman to win a world championship rally. There's all sorts of smaller rallies, but the world championships rallies always were drawing in the best of the world. Ding, she went ahead and won that outright. So it clearly shows the caliber of her skill set. Belgium gave her in 1956 the highest award for sport that they have as a country. They awarded to her. So at least she got recognition from her country. So next comes Roberta Cowell. Roberta Cowell was born as Bob Cowell. Roberta started racing as Bob, and even went so far as to race in a Grand Prix race, qualified for and entered a Grand Prix race, and did okay. But World War II came along, and World War II, Bob became a fighter pilot for the Royal Air Corps, and went off and served his time in the war, came home, married his longtime girlfriend, and they had a couple of kids. Then unfortunately, reality came to him, and he said, this isn't me. I don't think I'm really a man. I think I'm a woman. And became England's first sex change operation, and lived life as a woman, and went back to racing. And she raced as Roberta Cowell. And she never got the notoriety, the high credit after the war and after her sex change operation. And I don't know if her skill set necessarily was even, where half of it came from. But I think how hard it is to race in the first place. Then it's even harder to race as a woman. It's even harder yet to do it as a transgender or as a woman that has gone through an operation like this. I just think that there's so many things going against her, and yet she did it. And so that's not my path. It may not be yours, but the trick is impressive that this person had the ability to do this. So I just gotta give credit. So speaking of crazy, Betty Skelton. If you can't remember any of the names we've talked about here, remember Betty Skelton, just the one. Write it down if you have to. Betty Skelton was, I think she was nuts. Betty Skelton loved speed. She loved speed at absolutely anything and everything. She set land speed records 4 times for women. The picture in the lower corner over there is a land speed record car. Absolutely phenomenal. She was over 300 miles an hour. She just loves speed. A picture of her on that boat. Somebody said, "Can you take this boat and hit a jump and go over this car on this thing? It's a publicity stunt." Yeah, I can do that. She has no problem doing anything that was speed related. She's the first woman to be hired as a test driver for GM. They were just blown away by the fact that she could jump in the Corvettes and drive them faster at Daytona Speed Week than the guys were driving, the very same car. And they're like, okay, they could not ignore her. and they couldn't ignore her because of her speed. And so I just absolutely love this person's drive and determination. And so she raced, drove, and everything she did well. Betty was quoted in 2008. And bear in mind, in 2008, she's not a spring chicken any longer. She's now a little old lady. And when they asked her something, she goes, "But I just like to go fast. I enjoy it. I really do." That was her quote. And we just go, damn, girl. So, yeah, so you just gotta like it. She broke Cannonball Baker's race. There was of course, a 40-year bragging rights for driving across the country from New York to LA. She broke that record and at one point, and not just a women's record, that was the record overall. So impressive. She loves speed. Annie Bosque. Annie Bosque was she was not interested in racing. One day she was in a hotel lobby or the bar, probably the bar, and she crossed paths with Luigi Villoresi and Alberto Ascari. Now, those two are two of the greatest race drivers that have ever raced Grand Prix racing and Formula One style racing. But she crossed paths with those two, and they started talking racing in cars. It got her attention, and she said, "I'm going to try that." And being a free thinker, she just went out and she got herself a car, started racing, and then she got another car, and then another race. And within 2 years of that conversation, she was racing at the top level in the sport. She was entering every big race there was, things like Le Mans and other things. So she took second place overall in a 24-hour race that was in Paris. It wasn't Le Mans, but it was another race. Unfortunately, even though she was incredibly good, one of her Porsches and her did not work right. She crashed hard in 1956. So after only about 4 years of racing, she crashed and was killed. But her headstone says the words, "Women and motors, joy and pain." And so it clearly was a hardcore passion, even though it was only the last 4 years of her life. To me, it's very, very impressive that a person can jump into something with both feet and take it on and so readily. I mean, clearly the potential is sitting out there in so many people. They just need the right encouragement. So Denise Mcluggage. Anybody here know the name Denise Mcluggage? Man, there's a few. Denise was a character. She was, I've been to talks with her. She's listening. She would talk about racing. Now, Denise raced in a lot of cars. She didn't win very often, but she did well. The main thing she did was she was always the center of the party. She was never intimidated by the men on the racing. So this fun picture over there, that is the world's greatest race drivers at that time. None of them intimidated her. And she's the only woman sitting in that crowd. She would be the center of attention, the center of the crowd, center of the party, always. And if you weren't sure you were seeing Denise driving down the racetrack, all you had to look up and see that white helmet, the pink polka dots on it, and that was her, because she wanted to make sure she got your attention everywhere she went, every bit of the way. And when they asked her, what got you into racing? You know, they're expecting some big story. Oh, well, I raced on such and such. And nope. She goes, oh my God, have you seen Sterling Moss without a shirt on? She goes, I wanted to be part of that. And just like, you know, she just was funny. She was lighthearted. She just had a great attitude, and she didn't take no for an answer. She wanted to race. She raced. She was a good friend of Luigi Canetti. She asked for a race car. Enzo had said no. So Luigi said, I'll sell you the car for $1. So she bought the car for $1, took it to Sebring, raced it at the 12 hours of Sebring, brought it back, and Luigi gave her the $1 back. So she had friends in the right places because she was a phenomenal person, phenomenal personality. Doesn't matter if she didn't win every race she entered. So if we can't be a winner, just be like Denise is the point. So Annie, I don't want to say Annie's last name, Schwarzbach? I don't know how you say it. A French tennis star. She made it into Wimbledon in 1953, but she decided tennis wasn't her bag. She got into car racing, and her motto was live dangerously. After a few years of experience in getting herself noticed, she stepped up her game. She got this cheetah, a real live cheetah as a pet, and she'd take it places. And so if she wanted to get attention, it worked. And that got her the attention she needed to then say, hey, I want to race your car. I want to race. And she got races. She got the seat to drive in at times because she did these things. She made a scene. Should she have had to? Maybe not. But did she? Yes. So overcoming the odds, whatever way it takes. In her case, it was being a little flamboyant, being funny, being crazy, and getting out there and doing bizarre things. Unfortunately, that car number 227, that's a Ferrari 250 GTO. That's her car. And she had accidentally crashed it on that bridge. And so if it makes you cry when somebody crashes the 250 GTO, it should. You're not supposed to do that. But crazy lady, I liked her. She raced everything from Lolas to 250 GTOs. What else? She raced at Hercule Francorchamps hired her to race Ferrari 250 LMs. I mean, this is the biggest end of the race world at that time. Racing a 250 LM is extremely rare cars, very valuable, and that she won the right to race in them. So cool trick for her. Her worst moment, unfortunately, was that crashing of the 250 GTO on the bridge. So we'll forgive her for that, though. Barbara Hamilton. So we're talking about different racing. This is drag racing. Now, Barbara Hamilton in 1964, drag racing was still a man's sport, by golly. It's America, and we drive our cars and we're men. So, you know, if you had a small engine car, you could race, anybody could race, but because, you know, if the woman got out there in that small engine car and you wanted to beat her, just get a bigger car and get a bigger engine and get a supercharger on it. So all you got to do is ban women from racing with superchargers, and you could know you could beat them then, right? So along comes Barbara. Barbara wants to race, and she wants to race a supercharged car. And it took a battle, but they gave her the right to a couple of years worth of fighting. In 1964, Barbara became the first woman to receive an NHRA race, supercharger license. So she was now able to race with the big boys. And so a phenomenal achievement to do that. It's a Willys, Chevy powered Willys that she's driving, and she kept that car her entire life. In 1967, just 3 years later, they decided to revoke her license. She and a couple of the other women jumped on an airplane and flew out to LA, where the headquarters was for NHRA, and they demanded that they get the license back. Of course, the men didn't listen to them. There wasn't any women in that management board for NHRA. They ignored them. They left. Amazingly, they got a phone call a couple of weeks later, or actually like 2 months later, that said, you got your licenses back. Turned out that Andy Granatelli, who was sponsor to one of those women that was on that plane flying out, he didn't think that was very funny. And he went out and said, look, she's driving my car. I want her to race. Give her damn license back. To me, the shame is that NHRA needed a man to tell them to give the license back to the women. They should have listened to them when they came out. They shouldn't have taken it in the first place. But the fact that they got it back, they've never looked back since, and they haven't taken the licenses away since. So if you go down to the Don Garlits Museum in Florida, it's a phenomenal place to see anyway. Her car is in that museum down there on display. There's a book out called Supercharged. That's the story of her life and what it was like to race when you're told not to race, to constantly be out there to wrench on the cars. And so it's a cute story. It's self-published. It's a cute book. So you can look it up. I don't think none of the big places carry it, but definitely her husband still sells it, her family still sells it. So next person would be Shirley Shahan. So that's also an NHRA. She's in a 1966 at the Winter Nationals. She won the race outright. She won the tournament that weekend outright. And she went on to do countless wins and countless cars. And she's a legend within NHRA. And she was quoted as saying, "My experience in drag racing was fantastic, and it's something I will never forget. With all the records being broken by lady racers today, I'm proud that I may have helped pave a path for a lot of what's happened." And between her and Barbara, they were some of the very early people really racing big time in NHRA. So yes, they definitely paved the way. So definite legends in drag racing. So Marie Claude Beaumont was not drag racing. Marie was a French woman who would go and buy American race cars, bring them to Europe and race them, because she'd say, hey, it's got big American V8s. I can go fast. These are cool. And she just thought it was fun and it was very different. So the problem is that that's not easy. Getting an American car to Europe when they weren't selling them over there readily is a challenge. Then finding people to work on it and support you. But she did it. And she did this. She goes, I met Paddy Hopkirk. He was a rally driver. He motivated me to say, oh, I should start rallying. And Paddy Hopkirk was one of the greatest rally drivers back in the 60s. An odd little fella. But he liked Austin Minis. So, he's a little bit demented. So, yeah. But anyway, I like Marie Claude Beaumont because she was again breaking the trend and doing some fun things with American cars when nobody else was doing that over there. However, then we have Michelle Mouton. Michelle Mouton, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Michelle is a phenomenal person. Diminutive, little quiet lady, little French lady, loved road rallies. So as quiet as she is outside the car, she is a fierce demon in the car. She gets behind the wheel and the car goes absolutely as fast as it goes. If the car cannot make the corner, it's not her fault, it's the car's fault, guaranteed, because she had the skills. And there's a phenomenal interview of her that's on YouTube that you can watch. And she's being interviewed by some poor journalist. And the camera on the inside of the car is on her talking and on him hanging on, and the camera outside is showing the rally car they're in is flying over jumps, and she is holding the wheel with one hand, casually talking while she's doing this driving. Oh, I just love her style. Anyway, she was phenomenal. She wasn't just trying to race as a woman. She was trying to just beat anybody who raced. She was a female rally champ in Europe 5 times and a French rally champ 5 times. But she raced in the world champion. She got to 2nd place. She's just an amazing person. We'll touch on her later because she comes back up in my talk when she decided to come to America. But the next person up is Leila Lombardi. So she's the one that 15 years after Maria Teresa raced in Formula One. Leila made it to Formula One. She's actually the only woman to ever score championship points. She got a sixth place finish in, I think it was sixth place finish in a race in Formula One. And so she got championship points for that. She raced every kind of sports car. And she drove an Alfa Romeo GTV6. I love GTV6s. She raced one of those at one point. It wasn't her car, it was somebody else's, but at the race, they said, hey, Lola, want to get in there? It was a lot of times, if you said you wanted a woman to race your car, back in that time, somebody'd say, who? You want Lola to drive it? She had earned her spot. Everybody knew her in racing circles as the skill set she was. Phenomenally good and nice person. And I think she's still to this day is very active in women's racing sports. But the next person up is Desiree Wilson. Desiree Wilson, her husband wrote a book all about her. It's very cool. Driven by Desire. If anybody could beat Lola, it would be Desiree. Desiree raced absolutely every kind of car, everything. It was open wheel, trucks, sports cars, stock cars. She did not care. Give me the steering wheel. I want to race it. And she did it and did it at the top of her game. She'd raced at Indy. She did all sorts of things. So Desiree is phenomenal. She came to South Africa. She started racing at age 12. She worked her way through, and by 1978, she was considered the most accomplished female racer in the world. I don't know, she just is, just everything about Desiree was a no holds barred, just I'm going to go out there and I'm going to race till I win, or I'm not bringing this car back. And so she was very, very aggressive. So I love her absolute desire, far beyond anything I ever had. Man, I could never drive that aggressively. So next up is Giovanna Amati. Giovanna Monti. She was an odd duck because as a teenager, she got kidnapped in Italy because she comes from a wealthy family. She got kidnapped by the Red Brigade, who held her for ransom. And, had that not worked well, she might have not ever entered racing or any other thing in life. But she survived. She got into car racing, which is considered now much safer than hanging out with the Red Brigade because they killed a lot of people. She had no change, or she had to change the livery on her car all the time because she said she'd get out there racing and there were guys that didn't want to race against her because they didn't want to lose. So they were like, nope, if they see her car, they wouldn't race. So she said, well, I'll cheat. She changed the livery up on a regular basis. So that way they wouldn't see it and recognize her right off. And then all of a sudden, like, dang it, I got beat by her again. so she did well. She didn't race for very many years, but she was coached by Elio De Angelis and Niki Lauda. So she had some really good support behind her back. And obviously she took well to it. And so again, encourage people to race, encourage them to do well, encourage them to exercise their skill set. Hey, they might do well. So next up, we go back to drag racing. Shirley Cha-Cha Muldowney. She always made a scene everywhere she went and whatever she did. She is drag racing legend. She's the first woman to drive a Top Fuel dragster. She's won 3 NHRA Top Fuel championships in 77, 80, and in 82. It's the first time anybody, male or female, had won 3 Top Fuel titles. In 89, she became the first woman to clock a quarter-mile time of less than 5 seconds. So this is serious, hardcore drag racing. And yeah, she just, again, she didn't go off and ask for things. She just went out and earned it all the way along. People supported her, but she supported the race and supported the action. So phenomenal person, phenomenal effort. Janet Guthrie, another absolute legend. So Janet Guthrie, the first woman to compete at NASCAR super speedway races. She did that in 1976. She finished 12th in 1977 at the Daytona 500. And that's after the engine blew with 10 laps to go. So she was higher than that and just didn't quite get to go the last 10 laps. She ran the 1977 Indy 500 race as well with a broken wrist. She took 9th place in the 1978 Indy 500. She raced for 4 seasons, 33 races in NASCAR. She raced 3 Indy 500 races, and she still struggled to get sponsorship, even after achieving all that. So why did she struggle? Well, I don't know, maybe because she's a woman. And people sometimes struggle to support somebody because, I don't know, it's not a good look to have a woman driving our car. Why? Well, then you don't probably want their sponsor money. You want to find the right company. So it's just amazing to me. And so as she talked about it, she goes, without money in racing, you're just a fast pedestrian. So, she was not happy about not having money, and she ended up having to get back out of racing. She's been a supporter of race drivers and racing ever since, but just hasn't raced that much lately. There's a new movie coming out about her, and Hilary Swank will play the role of Janet Guthrie in that movie. I don't know, it's coming out in the next 6 months or a year. So up comes Mendy Fry. She started racing in quarter midgets when she was 14 years old and didn't think that was very cool. She thought it was fun, but she tried drag racing and she was hooked. And so she got into the racing in the 80s, and she really stayed with it. So nowadays you find her in the, they call it the vintage? I don't know what this actual word is. Nostalgic is what they call the Nostalgic Top Fuel Club, a nostalgic drag race. So she doesn't race the brand new car. She likes racing the old school front engine drag racers and things like that. So she's actually the only female member of the Nostalgia Top Fuel 250-mile-an-hour club. And I can't imagine driving those cars. Patty Moise. Patty Moise started with road courses at IMSA races when she was 16 years old. Then by the mid-20s, she was racing stock cars and entering NASCAR events. She owned teams and raced all the way up through the 90s. Patty Moise, just worked her way through. That was her entire career, was NASCAR racing. She made it her life. And you see that some guys will do that, or the Unser family or whatever will do things like that. Nope, Patty Moise did that against the odds. I mean, a woman owning a race team? Nope. In NASCAR, she is and does. So phenomenal person, phenomenal racer who helped set a trend. So, but we now get back to Michelle Mouton, because now we're in the 80s. And Michelle has decided to come to this country, and she's now racing an Audi, all-wheel drive, about a 496 horsepower car, doesn't quite 500 horsepower. And she decided to show up at Pikes Peak. And of course, when she shows up, that's a race for the guys. That's the good old boys a race. And the Unser family they own that place. And so she comes out, and when they look at her and they say, "What the hell are you going to do with that car?" She says, "A win." So now, sadly, in her very first attempt, she didn't. She had to settle for second. But she came back the next year, and she clearly trounced everybody the second year. And she explained it later that her car was obviously not running right in the first year, where she only got second. So just a phenomenal racer who's so underspoken, because she's not in your face. She's calm and everything. And yet, oh my God. So I just absolutely think it's one of my favorite things. So that's why in 85, the nickname for Pikes Peak was Unser Mountain. I'm thinking it started to fade because it was no longer Unser Mountain. The Unser family could do well, but now it was Mouton Mountain. So anyway, so next thing up is Shauna Robinson we're back in NASCAR. She is one of only 3 women to race in the Daytona 500. Shauna raced in 1991 through 1995. She returned in 2001 and raced until 2005. She was just a woman that just said, "No, racing's what I do." And she got out there and took pole position in NASCAR in 1994. No woman had ever done that. So phenomenal, again, setting a path. So we got to give her credit where it's due. Up comes Jennifer Jo Cobb. She currently runs race teams and races herself. She loves racing NASCAR trucks. She owns the team, but rather than hire a driver, she just likes getting out there, getting dirty. She likes going out there and taking, the car to the limits. She has raced in almost 250 races now, in both cars and trucks. She led for 16 laps at the Talladega Super Speedway. That's a racetrack that intimidates me just looking at the outside of it. And yet she led for 16 laps of that in 2020. So she is an avid current racer, and she's got other cars in her team, other people racing, and she looks for women drivers to get out there and race her cars. And you can tell we're getting up to the more modern era. Tally Joe Kirk here raced motorcycles through the 70s and 80s, and even reached the finals in the Grand National Championships level. But she struggled to get sponsorship, even though she's one of the best motorcycle racers at a time. So she goes ahead and shifts gears and goes into NASCAR, and she enjoyed some success in the 90s, but never could find sponsorship very easily. It was just a battle. The mean thing to say is that sponsors want a woman to win really everything they touch, or be really pretty. If they're really pretty, or they're a fast racer. Well, that's not how that should work, because how often do they judge the guys on how pretty they are? I just don't remember seeing that often. I've seen some pretty ugly guys racing. And I don't usually care. I don't think we're supposed to care, are we? That's just not how it's supposed to be. And yet, unfortunately, that is the challenge that's faced way, way too often. So I apologize for that, but that's how that is. So anyway, so thank you, Tally, for racing, even if you didn't get the sponsorship you wanted. So Lynn St. James, who was supposed to be here with me today, Lynn decided she couldn't even join online because she's traveling today for something. She goes, "So you got a paying gig." And I'm like, "What? More than I'm paying you?" Oh yeah, that's right. Paying her zip. But Lynn St. James, phenomenal book. If you're bored sometime, read this book. It'll chase away your boredom. Lynn St. James is a great person. And so Lynn was one of those people that she thought cars were kind of cool, but wasn't really that into it. But she got encouraged. Her husband bought a race car so he could race, and she jumped into it. And they took turns racing it. It was a Ford Pinto. So I don't know how well you know your Ford Pintos. They aren't the greatest things to race, but you learn racing because you don't have a car that's going to outpower everybody. You have to be the skill, not the car. Her husband then moved up to an old secondhand Corvette, and then she continued with the Pinto for a while. But pretty quickly, Lynn's skills, well, they outdistanced her husband's. Lynn has gone on. That was in the 70s when she was doing that Ford Pinto. She went all the way up to being the Indianapolis Rookie of the Year in 1992. She's the first woman to win that award. Her amazing career includes 62 IMSA races, 15 IndyCar races, 7 of those the Indy 500. That's the toughest IndyCar race to qualify for. And yet 7 of her races were that. 9 times at the 12 Hours of Sebring, 2 times each at Daytona, 24 hours, and Le Mans, 24 hours, and another 24-hour race at Nürburgring. She loves endurance racing. She loves the sports car racing. In 2022, this year, Lynn was inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame back in Detroit or Dearborn, wherever that is. Phenomenal person. She has been one of the loudest, most persistent voices on encouraging women to race. And she's got a foundation. She started out with the Lynn St. James Foundation. It then is now the Women in the Winner's Circle group, as the name changed. But it's still, they go out and they seek funding. They then pay for sponsorships. And we'll touch on some of those sponsorships later as you see some of the current racers today that are being supported by her. One of the very next people up is Sarah Fisher. Sarah Fisher runs race teams at Indy. She's been active at Indy for many, many years. Sarah Fisher is one of the first people to come through Lynn St. James Foundation to encourage women to get into racing. And Sarah Fisher pays it back because she is doing the same exact thing and helping put women on the racetrack at Indy and other places constantly. Sarah Fisher was raced at the World of Outlaws. She raced quarter midgets. She did, I mean, these are heavily male-dominated racing, and yet Sarah Fisher got out there and just raced right in it. She raced in Indy in 2010, and she continues as a team owner today, constantly putting women behind the wheel, giving them tryouts when other teams won't. Doesn't mean she always hires them, because she still wants the people to be the best person for the car, but she will give people a try when others won't. So thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Sarah, for doing that. Up next, Sabine Schmitz. Sabine was a legend. Now, when you say that Nürburgring racetrack can get in your blood, it really was in her blood. She was born on the racetrack. She lived on that racetrack. As a kid, she grew up in the little town that was part of this Nürburgring lap, the Nordschleife, the big, long 12-mile loop. Sabine, family, he has two more sisters that both raced as well. It's just because they all lived on that spot. It was a common sense thing to do. Sort of shows what happens if you encourage people to, as a no-brainer, go ahead and do this. You probably can. And she did, and she took it to the extreme. We saw her on lots of different races and things. She earned the name Queen of the Nürburgring. She had a phenomenal personality. She ran a racing service where she taught people how to race or would show them the track. She had the track taxi that she would fly around. She probably has more laps of that racetrack than almost anyone. She was also featured on Top Gear a few times. If you ever saw the classic episode of her taking Richard Hammond for a ride in the van, it was a Ford van that she raced around the Nürburgring as fast as she could. And I don't know how the thing doesn't fall over, but she knows how to drive better than I do, clearly, and clearly better than Richard, who's basically soiling himself next to her as she is flying around yelling at the cars, faster, 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 trying to get people out of her way. And she's driving a big delivery van. Sabine was a phenomenal person. She raced touring cars in Europe in 2015 and 2016. Sadly, she could outrun just about anybody, male or female, but she couldn't outrun cancer. And so we lost her just a year ago, something like that. So up next comes a force to be reckoned with, the Force sisters. So John Force was a huge name in drag racing. And when he has three daughters, guaranteed they're encouraged to race cars. And all three of them have taken on drag racing, and all three of them are phenomenally fast. So the oldest sister, Ashley's career started in 2004. She has many wins, but she made NHRA history when she and her father made history in Atlanta in 2007. They were the first father-daughter duo to end in the finals. They had to race against each other. Yeah, well, Ashley won. So that was a sweet one. So first time father-daughter race, and in the finals. And this is not, we're not talking a neighborhood race. We're talking a national championship level. So pretty impressive. Middle sister Britney, also NHRA drag racer. 2013, driving a top fuel dragster. In 2016, she became the first woman to win the NHRA four wide nationals. Those are weird drag races. If you've ever seen those, 4 cars side by side, and they send the lights down and they all take off. Man, that scares me, but they did it, and she's done that. She also, what else? She let's see, second woman in history to win the year's top fuel championship after Shirley Muldowney had done it in '82. And the youngest sister, Courtney, earned her NHRA competition license in 2005, her alcohol fuel license in 2008, funny car license 2011, and in 2012, Courtney won her first funny car race, defeating Matt Hagan in the final round of the Northwest Nationals here in Seattle. So all three of them shows what happens when you have a heck of a good start. You have incredibly good coaching and good funding and good support right behind you saying, do this is how you do it, get out there and do it. And you think how much any of us can achieve when we have that. Doesn't matter if you're male or female. So clearly the Ashley, Britney, and Courtney trio, phenomenal what they've done. Next up is Angèle Sampey, NHRA Pro Stock Motorcycle Champion in 2000, 2001, and 2002. She holds a record for 182 consecutive qualifies and races. And yet, after all that, she struggles to get sponsorship. And you just can't, I struggle to believe that if a guy had the same resume, they'd be struggling to get sponsorship. So this is, I mean, it's not something that's years ago. We're talking, this is current time. This is in the 2000s here. So I don't know. A phenomenal racer, phenomenal bike, phenomenal success, can't get sponsorship. So, oh well. Danica Patrick. Danica Patrick. So as time's gone on and you see how much encouragement that's given to somebody, how much opportunity is finally given, then nothing holds them back. Danica is a perfect example of that. Danica started kart racing at age 10 in 1992. She moved to the UK at age 16 to racing cars, then came back at age 19 to race open wheels. So by 2005, she'd won a ride in Indy cars and she took 3 pole positions and Rookie of the Year. She then won the 2008 IndyCar race in Japan. That doesn't happen. I mean, finally, she's a woman's won an IndyCar race. She's raced in 116 races. She retired. She retired to NASCAR. So we'll touch on the NASCAR in a moment when we get back to that, because that's her next step in her career. But phenomenal success in Indy before she even thought about NASCAR racing. And again, this happens because she gets the right encouragement, the right support, and maybe she looks the part, the sponsors do it. She earns it by begging the right people, or I don't know, but she is able to achieve that. That to me is beyond, yeah, it's beyond reality. I just love it. So up comes Katherine Legge. In 2001, she went out and raced out at a racetrack in a Formula 3 car. So it's an open wheel car, smaller engines, not as much horsepower as the Formula 1 cars, but that same car, the same track, same size engine, she beat Kimi Raikkonen's time. And Kimi Raikkonen has been a Formula 1 racer for many, many, many years. So clearly she showed potential at that point. So she was given the Rising Star Award from the British Racing Drivers Club, but her career still stalled in 2003 because she's struggling to find sponsors. In fact, she was struggling so much, she went to Cosworth, who was running teams, and she demanded to talk to the owner. She knew him, he knew her. She demanded to meet with him, and he wouldn't meet with her. And she said she's not leaving until he meets. Well, he sends his daughter out to talk to her. Just talk to her and get rid of her. The daughter comes out, talks to her for a couple of minutes, and then comes back and tells Dad, nope, no, she's not leaving, and you need to talk to her. And so Dad decides he's such a coward. He won't go out and talk to her. Instead, he offers her a contract. So I'll tell you what, I'll give you 3 races, but not in the UK, not even in Europe. You're gonna have to race in I'll run a team in it's the US Atlantic Toyota, whatever it is, race. And they were open wheel cars powered by Toyota engines. And he was gonna run some cars in it. He said, I'll let you race in there because I just don't want it's not the right look to have you racing my cars in Europe. Now, what's that look? What is that look he's afraid of? I can only guess it's that she's female, but she gets to the US, she enters that first race and she wins it. She podium finished the next 2 races. She didn't quite get first in those, but she got third. He extended that contract. He extended that contract for the rest of the year. And so she did well the rest of that year, but you think to yourself, why did she have to even play that game? What was his attitude? And that should not happen. And again, we're not talking ancient history here. This is the 2000s. We should not have to play that silly game. So anyway, Katherine is, she's still out there racing at times, but she's not, that was one of my favorite things, just that she was battling something that she should never have had to battle. And she proved her point by winning those races, winning that first race she was handed. So I just love that. Up next comes Susie Wolf. So Susie Wolf started in go-karts. She moved to open wheel race cars. She was very good. She also raced in some sedans. She raced in the Mercedes DTM class in Europe. Williams Racing F1 team offered her a chance to be a test driver for Formula One cars. And that was very forward thinking of Williams race team, because there's just not hardly any women that make it into Formula One. And yet they went out of their way to reach out to her. It didn't work. She never really did a lot of success in Williams or with their car. But she then started Venturi Racing, and she's the CEO of it. And they are going out looking for race prospects. And again, they're focusing on women. She has a little bit of support in her corner. She's actually married to Toto Wolff, who's the head of the Mercedes Formula One team. And so when she needs a car, she can sometimes go ahead and get a car. But she needs some technical help, she can get a little of that. And so it's nice to know that, all right, if Toto's helping her, I like Toto just a little bit better. Even if he beats the Alfa Romeo teams, I like Toto Wolff just a little better because she puts up with him. So, yep, very, very cool. Alexa De Joria, however you say her last name, NHRA, twice overall wins in 2014 driving funny cars. One was a U.S. national race driving a car with 11,000 horsepower. I just can't imagine 11,000 horsepower. I'm trying to keep that under control. At the same time, Erica Ender Stevens had won back-to-back NHRA Pro Stock championships. Pro Stock cars are limited. They only have 1,000 horsepower or a little more compared to that 11,000. But oh my gosh, these are phenomenal race drivers in their own. So we're getting up now close to modern days. These people are still, many of them are still racing. Next up, Leah Pruitt. She found a sponsor in 2016. She went out and got the car all ready to go, started a racing season. Sponsor coincidentally passed away. And she was like, oh my gosh, 11 days later, she had to put together a new sponsor, because when the sponsor died, he was a company that was basically centered around him and his skill set. And so she had to find a new sponsor to keep her racing going. She begged and borrowed and got Don Schumacher to agree, and he'd run a bunch of races. So he said, yes, I'll sponsor you for at least one more race as well. So she got another race or two. She went on to get Papa John's at Quaker State to finish out the season, and she did okay. She raced well, but so even if you get a sponsor, things sometimes can go against you, no matter how skilled you are. And there is no way to race these races without a huge box of money or a good sponsor. So very, very challenging. It's just funny how racing may be what we want to do, but it's all that other stuff behind the scenes that can get right in your way. Now, Danica Patrick, we come back to her because this is where she gets into NASCAR. So now she races 191 NASCAR races over 7 years. She led for 64 laps during NASCAR races. She won pole position in a race in 2012. She finished 8th at a Daytona 500 in 2013. And she had the most top 10 finishes of a woman in NASCAR history. Danica is a force to be reckoned with. And just as easily as she entered racing, she got back out of it. She is no longer a racer. She's like, I retired from that. I got other things to do. And you see her as a spokesperson on racing events. But it's just, God, I'm impressed by somebody that can take it on, be that serious, be at that level in the sport, and then also step away from it. Yeah, I'm done. I wouldn't know what to do with myself, so I'm impressed. All right, coming up now, we're still in the 2010s. We got Hailie Deegan, who's a phenomenal off-road racer, trucks, and also runs NASCAR. We're not going to dig in too deep on some of these people. I'm just kind of bringing the names up to you so you have some name familiarity, just to make sure you're aware of these people that are out there running and racing right now. So when you see their name, or if you hear it, you can say, yeah, I heard about that. I heard they're out there. I just want you to make sure you're aware of them. So Kenzie Hemrick, Nicole Behar, both running in NASCAR races. They're about, not every single race, not every single series, because there is 3 levels in NASCAR, but they're out there racing. Up comes next is Simona De Silvestro. Now, last year, she raced V8 supercars in Australia, which is a very aggressive racing. Oh my gosh, those cars are not bumping into each other. And oh, they are so aggressive on how they race. It's like the German touring car races and things like, just impressive how hard they can race. She did that last year. She has a great history at Indy and other places. Porsche has now hired her to race their cars for the endurance racing cars. So she's a test driver for Porsche at this point, and hopefully will then carry that into a full-time ride and driving. She's driven Indy, sports cars, and much more. So watch for her in endurance races in the future. She will be racing. Jamie Chadwick, young kid. Jamie has won the W Series, which is the women's open wheel, like Indy racing, but it's focused only on women. The W Series, Chadwick won it in 2019 and 2021. She would have won probably in 2020 if they'd held it, but they didn't hold one in 2020. She's back for 2022. So she will be a force to be reckoned with as racing goes forward. And you're going to see her in bigger, Indy races and things as time goes on. Pippa Mann, I'm not sure what Pippa's future is, but she has done well racing in Indy Lights and Indy cars. But she's struggling right now to get a ride and continue, and it's starting to drive her nuts. So I have a feeling she may also retire here soon. Up next is Christina Nielsen. She had a father who was a good coach. He was a hardcore racer. And so by 20 years old, she was racing Porsches, Ferraris, Aston Martins, Lamborghinis. And she's the first woman to win an IMSA WeatherTech championship race. And then the other three right below her, Rahel, Manuela, and Michelle, those three, they all race against each other in things like the Ferrari Challenge Series and for a variety of sports car races in Europe. But when it comes to Le Mans, they all team up together and they race on a team as the all-woman team racing at Le Mans. They've done it for a few years in a row, and they plan to do it going forward. And I think it's the Kessel race team is what it's called. And they're just phenomenal. They, I just like the fact that they're all aggressive competitors against each other until one day, a 24-hour period, they suddenly become teammates. So, yep. Sheena Monk. Sheena graduated from the prestigious Lamborghini Corso Pilota school. Then she ran the Lamborghini Super Trofeo North American Race Series and impressed her coaches. She immediately got rides in other cars. Unfortunately, she had a big crash in 2018. 9 broken bones and stuff. It took her a while to come back, but she came back in 2021 and in the IMSA Michelin Pilot Series, and she was driving a McLaren 570S GT4. So she is out there, racing and racing hard. And, men and women both can crash. Men and women both can get hurt. Cars are much safer than they used to be, but they're not safe. Bad things happen. So Sheena's got the drive, so she's back, broken bones and all. So up comes Britney Zamora. So Britney is from Kennewick, Washington. She's one of our little locals here. She's only 22 years old, but she's been racing for 18 years because her parents started her at age 4, and she's done well. She's, because she's young and it's a tough market, she struggles to find sponsorship. It doesn't come from a wealthy family, so they can't bankroll her bad habits. She has to find that sponsor. So right this year she doesn't have a ride figured out, but she is definitely looking. Chloe Chambers, also multi-talented, set a world driving record on a slalom driving a Porsche Cayman. There's a video online. Her sitting in this Cayman, and they start, and they have a camera in the car and they have one outside, and she is absolutely, it was like a machine, boom, back and forth as she goes through that slalom. It is absolutely scary how fast she could go in that. And every time I look at a slalom now, I think how slow those people are going. She doesn't hit a cone. She is rock solid, perfect position. clears the cone by an inch on either side. I'm like, okay, it's one thing on the driver's side, but how you clear by that tight on the passenger? Yep. So phenomenal skill set. She's young, just an upstart in the race. So the question will be how well she'll do going forward. But she has a ride in Formula 4 right now, so we'll see how she does. So Taylor Hogler got into racing when her sister had gotten a voucher to take a race driving school, and her sister goes, I don't want that. Discarded it. She said, I'll take it. And she took it just because it would be something fun and different. Well, she did it, put to good use. She's now racing in the TCR racing series, which I know she's racing in a Hyundai, chasing down, sometimes maybe even beating an Alfa, because there is an Alfa in the TCR series. I'll forgive her for that. But the fact is, she's very skilled and doing very well. So we'll see her going forward. She's had 1 first place and 5 podiums last year alone. So Taylor's doing well. Tatiana Calderon, she is really made a name for herself. She is a Colombian racing driver. Her family owns a couple of car dealerships down there. So cars were just kind of an automatic thing in her life. Of course, she drives those. She has just been hired by AG Foyt Racing to be a driver for them for this year's Indy Series. So watch for her, root for her. She drove in the Richard Mille Racing and FIA World Championship or Endurance Championship, driving an LMP car last year. And oh yeah, she was an Alfa Romeo test driver for their Formula 1 team. So, I like her. I'll support her, whatever she wants to do. So Sophia Flores, German driver, currently racing in the European Le Mans Series. She's raced the German touring cars. She's raced the endurance championships and Formula 3 and Formula 4. She doesn't get along with hardly anybody. She's got a really tough personality in a lot of ways, but she's a phenomenal driver. So you'll find quotes from her online or comments about her online, and they're always, she's taking people to task. She just doesn't make friends, but she races fast. So I'm hoping that that'll all pan out for her well, and she will continue doing well in racing. Courtney Crone, just 18 years old. She's been racing in Formula 4 series. She's been a challenger, but she's had a number of past podium finishes in the Formula 4 racing. But she is not sure. She's looking for a ride. She's looking for sponsors. She's looking for a team to join. Sarah Bovey is she's from Belgium. She did well last year in European Le Mans Series. She's aiming at the W Series. She's hoping to be part of it. Don't ask me how you say Bitska. Bitska, is there? Bitska. We'll say Bitska. She's been racing for 10 years. She's done extremely well in the LMP cars. Those are extremely, the cars that are so low and extreme you see in Le Mans style racing and Daytona racing. She's been racing those. She'll be racing in the W Series in 2022 as she's gotten a race with Siren Racing. So she's got a chance this year to earn some more. Kaylee Bryson. So Kaylee Bryson, another one of the great young names. She's been racing in dirt and sprint cars, but this year she found a sponsor within the NASCAR world. Toyota Racing has hired her. She is, she's just thrilled to be a good role model. I mean, these are kids, and she wants to be a good role model for girls. She wants to be a good racer. She wants to see where it'll take her. So I'm thrilled that Kaylee's got a ride for 2022. Emily Linscott is from the UK. Last year, she moved to Indianapolis to be closer to the teams. She raced last season in Formula 4, driving for Kiwi Motorsports on a racing scholarship that came through the Lynn St James group, if I remember right. That scholarship is weird. That's where she applies for somebody to pay all of her entry fees and help support her whole racing efforts. And just like a school, there are scholarships out there. So if you have a burning desire to race and you don't have any money, that's just one of your avenues. And thanks to people like Lynn St. James and others, there are those tools. So that's very cool. Emily's funny. Everybody's looking for ways to raise money. So one of the ways is you could pay them, $60. So I hope my daughter's not watching right now, because I paid her $60 to wish my daughter a happy birthday. And so she did a little video and gave it to my daughter of Emily, saying, hey, happy birthday. I hope you have blah, blah, blah. You know, it's just, to me, it's just kind of fun. But that's just, they're creative modern ways that they never thought of in the past to help fund their racing habits. Yuyu Noda is a racing prodigy in Japan. She started go-kart racing at 3 years old. Her father is a successful Formula One racer. And so she was pushed and motivated. Get out there and race. This is going to be good. Well, at age 9, she drove a Formula 4 and she broke all sorts of records. At age 14, she drove the season in the Danish F4 series. Age 15, she did the US F4 racing series. She was right now looking for a ride in 2022. She was hoping to be part of the W Series racing, but they haven't announced the newbies for it. The only people we know that are in the W Series are people that won a certain number of races last year. Those are automatically in, but the new ones we haven't heard yet. So phenomenal, and yet you realize she is still a kid. She is just a kid. Oh my gosh. Abby Pulling is from the UK. She raced in British Formula 4 races in 2020 with 4 podium finishes, F3 series in the W Series in 2021. And she has been announced as part of the 2022 series because of the races she did last year. Sarah Moore. She loves racing, but she has done a lot as a transgender woman, transgender person. She has done a lot to help bring awareness to the LGBTQ plus community by being out there and racing and not hiding. She says, no, this is cool. I am who I am, and she doesn't, and you know, she struggles sometimes to get sponsorship, but she is out there racing and trying to set an example as a race driver and as a person. So very, very cool. Jamie Chadwick. Oh my gosh, Jamie Chadwick wins almost everything she's thrown at. The race series that she was in 2021, she won the overall victory of that whole series for the season. And she's coming back to the W Series as part of the Jenner team. That's the Caitlyn Jenner sponsors a race team, pays for all their expenses, and she'll be racing on the Jenner team next year. So 3 years ago, Amna Alkhabazi, however you say her name, became the first Middle Eastern woman to take part in a motorsport test. It was only a couple months after the ban on women driving in Saudi Arabia was lifted. So she immediately jumped in as a racer. She also is the first Middle Eastern woman to race at Le Mans. If she keeps going, she'll create a list of firsts. And in 2022, she'll be racing in the Abu Dhabi F3 series. So in a place where she wasn't even legally able to drive, she is now racing. And so that's called, you're immediately opening the gates and saying, I'm going to do this. I just love that she's able to exercise her skill. Samantha Tan has already achieved 1 win and 2 pole positions this year alone in the racing. So she is phenomenal racer out there. So these are his names that you want everybody to be aware of and be sensitive to. These are some of the people behind the scenes supporting him. Shay Holbrook focuses on finding people that actually have passion, preferably female, and putting them in the racing cars, trying to make sure that young girls get chances, that people get chances. Shay is a phenomenal racer herself. And this is shayracing.com is her site. If you ever are looking for something to support or brag about, go on there and check it out. ParettaAutosport.com. Beth Peretta runs Indy teams. She runs a very highly professional race program, trying to do development, for people coming through the series, and she's trying to get people into the seats of Indy cars. She's running at Indy women-only teams, pit crews, engineers, everybody, women only, just for the fun of it, just to say, let's see what we can do. Let's make this happen. So that's Beth and Lynn St James in the picture. They're obviously work very closely on a lot of things. So there's also these other things that what we can do. The FIA Women in Motorsports Commission is out there. It's fun to follow some of these things. The W Series, it's free to enter because you have to find somebody who's a team that's going to pay for your car. They don't charge you to get in because all the other racing does that, but we want to make sure people get in here as women and race. So free to enter. Skill is the only measurement for finding the fastest people in that car. Can't buy your way in. NASCAR's Drive for Diversity. NHRA has one. I forgot to list it up here. But NASCAR and NHRA are doing a very good job of really being more inclusive. Lynn's thing, the Women in the Winners Circle Foundation, which again goes out and gets corporate sponsors. So a little sneaky trick that I do, I'm a very biased guy. I go on to places like that and I see who their sponsors are. I see who their donors are. And then I make sure I support those companies. And if they're not supporting them, I don't support those companies. You know, I'm voting with my money. So if you go on there and you see McDonald's is supporting them, I'm like, oh, dang, I got to go buy a McDonald's burger. But still, the idea here is it tells you a lot about a company and about a group if they sponsor or if they pay for the things that you care about. So if for nothing else, go on any of these sites and look those things up. So into the future, I don't want to necessarily read all these things, but there's a lot of things. This is a list of many of the great organizations out there that are supporting women and girls entering into racing. There's just a variety of different things. The Women in Sports Foundation, the Shift Up Now. I mean, there's people here racing in the Northwest that are members of the Shift Up Now group. These aren't big groups. They're just trying to say, if we'll either offer support or just encouragement or just, you know, we're all together in the same club. It's like joining the Avance Club. If you join a club, sometimes you realize that, hey, there's more people out there like me. And so this is a phenomenal thing. There are, I noted on the bottom that there's women's sports. 40% of athletes in this world are women, but only 4% of the coverage is women's sports. Huh. That's what seems wrong with those numbers. That just seems like bad math. So the answer is, watch women's sports more. And if you watch more women's sports, you go to more women's basketball games and volleyball games, then sometimes they start taking more notice and say, hey, maybe we better give them more respect. I mean, it's just a little simple thing you can do, because by supporting them, suddenly they're getting the notoriety they deserve. And I don't know why we should have to say this kind of thing. We shouldn't. It should just be automatic. But yeah, so support those things. I've even heard guys tell me, well, yeah, but women's basketball is not as good as men's basketball. Really? Have you watched it? It's different, but it's not like it's not fun. It's like there are good basketball games and there are bad basketball games. And that can be true whether it's men or women, doesn't matter. The issue is just watch and support. So, so thank you all for coming. The quiz is only a 30-page quiz. But there are some phenomenal books. Janet Guthrie's book, you know, I'm sitting here, I got Lynn St James, I've got Desiree Wilson's. There's also this one that was suggested to me, The Fast Ladies. This is basically from the early days of racing all the way up through the 70s. And these are all readily available. But fun topics, just fun reading. Just gives you all sorts of inside stories that I didn't share. You thought I shared everything. The next talk, May 7th is my next talk down here as part of the If Alphas Could Talk series. We'll be talking about the art and science of carrozzeria. Carrozzeria is the coach building. When they build the cars in Italy, think about how many car manufacturers there are. In the old days, there was over 150 different carrozzeria in just in the town of Turin, Italy, or Torino, Italy. 150 different people making car bodies. So you think about Vignali and Zagato and Pininfarina. These are the big names that still survive. But back then there was a lot. So we'll be talking about that next time. And we'll be talking about Alphas into the future in June. So thank you all for being here today. If there's any simple, quick, easy questions, I'd be happy to see if there's a show of hand in the room. Any questions anybody wants to throw at me? I don't see any hands jumping up. Any questions online? Anything crazy?
There was one chat comment about Cheryl Lynn Glass.
Cheryl Lynn Glass.
Black female professional racer. And she's local.
Cheryl Lynn Glass went to high school with me, so I know her. Yes, I know her. She went on, she raced. She was, much like some of these other people, she was very quiet and very confident, very capable. And she went on to racing. And it was so funny, you would never think this is a race driver, except when she gets behind the wheel of a car. And she did very, very well. But yes, she was the first Black woman to be racing in almost any race she entered. She was usually a trendsetter that way. So yeah, very, very cool. Thank you for mentioning that. So, well, hey, everybody, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for being online. Thank you for watching this video. It's a little longer than we thought, but we hope you learned a little bit, or at least gained a name or two that now will stick to your memory. So when you hear it again, you go, ah, that person was a good racer. So, all right, thank you.